Hello again, I'm Sarah, this is Hardcover Hearts, and I'm here with my best of collection of videos. This is going to be my best of for backlisted fiction. If you're interested in more front-listed fiction, please look at the video. I'll link that one below. And that one has some more books that were released in this year, more contemporary. So as I mentioned in the last video, I read a tremendous amount of books. And so it's never possible for me to do like a top 10 ranking. And I don't really know how that's helpful to you. If you're thinking about, if your tastes match my tastes and you're like, oh, well, what really stood out? I wanted to give the breadth and scope of all the things that I loved. And I take this much time into the new year to post this. Number one, because I get really busy at the beginning of the year. But the second is I like to let it sit for a little bit. And I read so many great novels at the end of the year. I want to make sure that I'm not undervaluing one. So here we go. This is the backlist loves and favorites of mine from last year. So the first one is a book that I read with my dear friend Leo from Leo's Little Book Life. This is South Riding by Winifred Holtby. We've got this gorgeous pastoral setting right here in the front of this book. And we meet Sarah Burton in this book. And she is a very feisty young spinster who has come to be kind of the head of this school. This girls' school in this rural village. So one of the things I loved about this book is the unusual setup. It opens with different books. And so each book or each section focuses on a kind of municipal means of governing this small village. And so book 1, education. Book 2, highways and bridges. Book 3, agriculture and small holdings. You get the picture. And it goes all the way through with that. And so you would expect it to be very dry and boring, but in fact, it is teeming with life. And it's teeming with the challenges of this young Sarah Burton as she's arriving in this town to take over a post. And she's a spinster with all sorts of big fancy London ideas of independence and breaking tradition and what the new thing for girls and the ways that girls can be. And she cares passionately about her job. And she comes head to head with a lot of people in this community that don't feel the same and are not as inclined to try new ideas and new things. There's a lot of characters, but there's so many things in here that were charming and homey, but at the same time, you can tell that Winifred Holtby is really pushing some ideas here, ideas about governance and the importance of governance and the importance of caring not just for the wealthy and not just supporting the wealthy, and what that can do for a community. So this was this sleepy little book, carried quite a message, and I loved it. Then I did a group read for the Author Spotlight series of Toni Morrison. So of course some Toni Morrison books appeared here. The 3 that really did it for me, that really, when I look back at everything that we read, these were the ones that stand out. And the first one, The Bluest, was absolutely remarkable and a great introduction to her style, to how she writes, which is very much to set the biggest, most controversial action at the very beginning, and then circle around and explain why with deep, deep, deep characterization. In this book, we meet some young girls in Ohio. And these young girls include Piccola and Claudia. And Claudia does a lot of the talking for Piccola. And we also have an omniscient narrator who kind of tells us and kind of takes us flying over this little black enclave in this town in Ohio. We see that Piccola is going to have to stay with Claudia and her family. She's been taken out of the home because she has been abused by her father. And this sets off all sorts of ripples in the community. But what we start to get is the backstory of who are all these people in this community. How could this happen? And embedded in this book is a sense of shame of race, shame and self-hatred that comes from living in a racist society, living in a society that hasn't really dealt with all of the ramifications of slavery. And also the generational trauma that just keeps passing on from one generation to the next. I loved these little girls. I loved these little girls. And like I said, it was a fantastic way to be introduced to her works. The next book that I absolutely loved is Sula. Sula almost feels fable-like. We have Nell and Sula that are best friends and come from very, very different homes in this strange town called the Bottoms. That is where all of the Black community live in this town. And we have Nell, who comes from a very proper, very strict home life. And then we have Sula, who comes from just a wild, wild home, whose mother doesn't really know who the father is, and enjoys her time with men around town, and is lusty and doesn't deny herself pleasure. And her grandmother, who has, under mysterious circumstances, lost a leg and therefore owns their home and sits in the second floor and observes everything that's happening in this town. We have this relationship between these two girls that is so deep and so powerful and so intense. It reminded me of the Ferranti series, Little Friend, the Napoleonic, I was going to say Napoleonic, Neapolitan series, the quartet, with just how intense the bonds between these two girls are as they grow up and start to live their lives. Remarkable work. I'll be thinking about this for a very long time. Oh, and then the book that almost did me in. Oh God, this book is so much. It's so much. This is Beloved. This is the work, the preeminent work by Toni Morrison, the one that is recognized as her masterpiece. And I think she won the Pulitzer for this one, if not the Nobel. I can't remember off the top of my head. But for me, this was a horror story. I could not breathe as I read this book. This is one of those books that changes you, that you cannot look away. Toni Morrison puts her foot on your neck and does not let it up the entire way through. It is the story of Beloved, of course, but Beloved is the ghost of a child that was killed by her mother instead of allowing her family to be taken and returned back into slavery that they've escaped from. We meet this family living in this house as freed Black people, but our main character, Seth, is an escaped slave with her daughter, Denver. She had some sons that she got out as well, and they've all been living with her mother-in-law, waiting for her husband to come, and waiting kind of without hope. It's been many, many years, and they can only assume that he has either been captured or is dead. The house is haunted. It's obvious the house is haunted, but they live with this spirit. Well, the boys don't. They, as soon as they can, they up and leave this house. But Denver loves, because she's kind of the only child left, and she loves this ghost. And it's only when Paul D, who is someone that Seth knew, and Baby Shug, the mother-in-law, knew from the plantation that they all lived in, he arrives and ousts Beloved and begins a relationship with Beloved's mother. Beloved then shows back up in human form and wreaks havoc, slowly but surely. It is so powerful. It is so wrenching. The portrayal and understanding of racism, of the brutality, even of kind slave owners. But what the system does to people and what it did to people, and the legacy and the things that haunted everyone, not just ghosts, but actual trauma. This is probably one of the best books I'll never read again, because it was that intense. And I'm so very thankful that I had a whole group of people to read this with. Thank you so much for going on this journey and holding my hand through the terror. Okay, this is something that it was not terrifying, actually delightful, and probably is one of my new favorite characters in literature. I think next to Harriet Vane, this might be one of my favorite characters. This book is The Slaves of Solitude by Patrick Hamilton. And in this book, we meet Ms. Roach. And this is set during the war, during the Blitz, and we are set in London. And we have Miss Roach, who is working for a publishing house. And she used to live in London, but because of all the bombings, it's not safe. And so she's relocated to a boarding house kind of on the outskirts of London. She's in this very strange boarding house with all of these characters, all of these people, and including probably one of the most odious, obnoxious, rude people I've had the misfortune of reading about, and that's Mr. Thwaites. While she's there, she meets an American who's, kind of a charmer and a big heavy drinker that keeps taking her out and wanting to go out with her, and going out to the local pub and then out all night carousing. And she gets pulled into his web and into his way of just kind of forgetting what's going on, and kind of taken with the romance of the abandon that they're living their lives. She also has a friend who is a German woman who lives in London. And this German woman starts to slowly inch her way in to Miss Roach's life, including finding herself a room at the same boarding house and finding herself invited with her and her gentleman friend for these outings. And it really tests our Ms. Roach. So she's being tested left and right, and during a time when there's all sorts of things going on in the world. And I loved this book. And this ending was everything. Oh, I was so happy with such a wonderfully rich ending of this book. So if you have not read Slaves of Solitude, I'm here to tell you it's a great book. Before we did the Author Spotlight series on Toni Morrison, we did this on Shirley Hazzard. And I'm here to say that some of these were rereads, and they stood up and even more deeply after reading them with other people. Shirley Hazzard is a very interesting writer. She's a sophisticated writer. She's a very layered writer, and she has all these markers that you can you can observe as you're reading it, and something that becomes more evident as you reread. So the first was a book that I had read before. This is The Bay of Noon by Shirley Hazzard. And this is the story of Jenny working in Naples. And it's kind of Jenny's, I would say, coming of age, not coming of age in terms of being young and being deflowered or anything like that, but coming of age into really understanding human relationships and what she wants and observing. And, you know, I love a good story about female friendships. And in this, Jenny meets Gioconda. And Gioconda is an older woman, very elegant, and she lives in Naples, and she has a lover from Rome who is a married man, but she's in love with. And Jenny ends up observing and watching and seeing Gioconda and how she lives her life, and maybe seeing a way that she never thought possible for herself. And the images of Naples, the understanding of the Italian landscape and culture and society through this book was phenomenal. I absolutely loved it. The next is The Evening of the Holiday, also by Shirley Hazzard. And this is a very tender love story. This is a story of Sophie, and Sophie has gone to visit her great aunt, and her great aunt lives in Italy. And Sophie is part Italian, part English. And so she kind of comes back and forth pretty frequently. While she's there on a visit, she meets an older gentleman named Tancredi. And Tancredi is a man, a very sophisticated man, who has just separated from his wife and children and come to live in this town, leaving his wife and children to their home, which is further afield. He doesn't expect to fall for her, but he expects her to fall for him because he thinks she maybe is a little young or a little naive. But instead, she's the one who has to deal with his affection and his love for her. And does she want to have a relationship? Does she want to move? Does she want to start something up with this man? There's a lot of push and pull. And to me, this was a very realistic romance. This is quiet, it's slow, and it's luxurious and also a little uncomfortable, like a hot Mediterranean evening. I loved it. Then this, I think, is probably one of her more complex novels. This is also from Shirley Hazzard. This is The Transit of Venus. I think this is the one that this might be the one that she's most known for. And this is just a masterfully told story of these two sisters, Caro and Grace. And they've come from Australia to England and meet up with some people that will forever change their lives in post-war England. This is complicated and challenging, but visually so impactful. And there's, oh my God, I literally see so many images in my head when I look at this cover. It's the intelligence and passion of a kind of thwarted love story of these two of these characters, and the ways that people kind of grow apart and full, rich lives that people can have is all found in here. Another book that I did, so you see these author spotlight series have been incredibly rich and rewarding. This was a book that I'm so glad I also read with a group. This is The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt. Now, this is an experimental novel. It's a novel of ideas. It's really a thesis set in a novel. It's a story of Sibylla and Ludo. Sibylla is a single mother. She is raising her son Ludo with the values that she feels that she was not given in her childhood, which was intellectual rigor and curiosity and discipline. And she almost starts an experiment with her child to allow him to explore all of his curiosity, including learning Japanese as a very, very young child, including reading Homer, including all sorts of wild things that this child, who's just an absolute genius, just absorbs and soaks in. But the one thing that she doesn't give her child, because she gives him as much as she can, time, space, free ability to, free range, so to speak. Though she does not have a lot of money, she's a translator for technical documents that is just boring and horrible, but it allows her to stay home with Ludo as he's growing up. But she denies him the awareness and information of who his father is, because she is embarrassed and doesn't think that he lives up to the standards that she would want him to ascribe to. Challenging book, but this book really made me think about the ways that we self-impose limits to our ability to learn and our ability to be intellectual. It's a thinker's book. So much of this went over my head. I will not lie. But again, reading this with a group was absolutely a remarkable experience, and it's a brilliant piece of work. Very, very well crafted, very thoughtful, very well executed. And then the last went from very complicated, very experimental, very kind of high craft, to quiet, show not tell, devastatingly brilliant. This is Address Unknown by Katherine Kressmann Taylor. This tiny, tiny, tiny little book was so powerful. And it tells the story of, through letters, of these two men who, we meet them in San Francisco. They own a business together, a jewelry business. And one family decides to return to Germany, and the other remains behind. The one that remains behind in San Francisco is a Jewish family, and the one that goes to Germany is not. And the ways that the German family gets sucked into and swept up by Nazi fascism and starts to buy into it and believe it and tout it is shockingly rendered. And the response and the pain and the astonishment and hurt of the partner and deep good friend to hearing some of these things is so well played in this book. If you want to read a book that is tightly crafted but still has emotion and doesn't lay everything out and has a twist like no other, oh, this is it for you. This was phenomenal. Okay, so those are the books that I read that are kind of like the backlisted books. I would love to know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were. And stay tuned. Next up will be classics.